Hello, my name is Sydney and today I'm going to be doing another writing update videos. So let's talk about them writing words. Did that work for like a little catchphrase? Maybe not. Okay, anyway, so the last time we talked I was telling you how I had some issues with my Storm Cloud series, and mainly because I didn't give it enough time to rest between drafts and for me to distance myself from the draft before I went and tried to revise it. So I took a break from that and I picked up Project Storm Cloud. No, I put down Project Stormcloud. I picked up Project Pitchfork. And so that happened probably about 2 weeks ago or so, right around the end of February. The last time I worked on this story was back in June of last year. June of 2017, so it's been like, what, 8 or 9 months? I don't feel like doing the math. Ever since then, the only interaction I've really had with this story, aside from just kind of thinking about it in the back of my mind, is just, you know, reading a chapter or two every now and then when I miss the story or I feel like reading a chapter that I remember really loving. When I had to get back into it, I had to basically read through all of my notes for the story. And I keep my notes for this story in 2 different places. One, I keep it on OneNote, Microsoft OneNote, and I also keep it in my notebook for the story. This says ideas and scene planning notebook, but that's not what I use it for. It's just the notebook for Project Pitchfork. And I actually started this last year around this time. I've almost filled up the entire notebook, which is crazy because I've never filled up a notebook before. Throughout the last draft when I was working at it, I did a lot of really good notes in here that were really good to look through. I have all these like little kind of tab thingies in here, and those are because I had so many different pages and like so many different types of notes in here that it made it difficult to like find a specific page if I needed it. So I just put the tabs, they're color coded in the beginning. Pink is for things that have to do with the timeline of the story. Yellow is things that I want to add or change. Blue was ideas and questions that I had about the story. Green was anything about the themes or the plots. And then orange was just anything else that was miscellaneous but still important. So not every page is tabbed, but you know, a lot of them are. So just reading through all of this kind of was really good to help me remember where I left off, what were the major issues in the story the last time that I read through it, because there were 2 major issues. So first off, let me say, when I finished this draft, it was the first full draft of this book, because I'd written kind of like bits and pieces of it before, but it was not one continuous draft. But last year, from Thanksgiving actually, of 2016 all the way to June 1st, I think, I wrote 141,000 words in this one draft, which is the biggest draft. Not that I've written a whole lot of complete drafts, but that was like a really massive draft. That's almost twice what it needs to be. I'm aiming with the story to get it down to like around 115,000 words, which is still kind of a lot, but since it's fantasy and it's YA, you know, you get a little bit of leeway. So what I was saying, the issues that I had with the story the last time I was working on it were twofold. One, I needed the whole entire world, or at least most of the world, to be built around the story, not just part of it. And that was a major issue because I'd only built parts of the world that my characters were interacting with directly, but there was this whole other part of the world that I had no idea what was going on about. I might have like speculated about it, but I hadn't come up with anything concrete for it, so it made it very hard to not break my own rules, because I did do that. I was breaking my own rules of the story of the world because I didn't really know what those rules were. So I was contradicting myself when I was writing the story. It led to me writing blindly in a lot of ways because, again, like, I wasn't able to speculate too much about what things could happen in the future, or whether the things that I had speculated could happen in the future, in future books, were logical, would even make sense. And it's dangerous to become attached to future ideas when you've not built the world, because those ideas may have to change. And it also just led to me feeling like the story had this underlying messiness where, and by that I just mean, if you look at the story kind of from a distance, it looks like a really good story. Like, the plot seems really cool, the characters seem really cool, but then when you zoom in with a magnifying glass, you kind of see the mess that the story really is, because things jump around so much. It's not clear enough, and you know, that's part of the issues that came about in not having this world being built as extensively as it could have been. Especially compared to my Project Stormcloud series, I have built that world to a T. Like, literally, we could just step in there right now and we would, like, we'd have things to do, we'd have people to see, we would know what the laws were. Like, it's such an extensively built world that it was hard to look at Project Pitchfork and be like, and see the world and see how unbuilt it was. So the second issue that I had with this story the last time I was working on it was that there were too many plots taking precedence. So instead of having like one major plot and then several subplots feeding into that, I had all of my plots acting like main plots, you know, and so it made it very difficult for the main plot of the story, which is my characters kind of, you know, seeing through her goal of the story. It made her plot get overshadowed by other plots, which is not good, because then it makes it hard to tell, okay, who is actually the protagonist here, what is the kind of premise, what is the main goal of the story. That got really jumbled when there was a bunch of other plots, a bunch of other characters' goals that were taking precedence over my main characters. What I've been doing in this revision is that I've been trying to streamline all of my plots so that way the main plot is, you know, it looks like the main plot, and all of the subplots are feeding into it rather than gnawing down on it, if that's a good analogy at all. So one thing I've been doing to try to streamline this story is trying to figure out, okay, what are the major events that need to happen in this book? And, you know, playing with the order a little bit. Should this event happen before? Does it need to happen after? Does it need to happen at about the same time? You know, what events cause one another? And a lot of this was already kind of sorted out for the first draft, but I just been having to step back and look at it again just to make sure, okay, yes, this still makes sense. This is still how it needs to be. And also, in my OneNote, I've been looking at a bunch of different pages that I've had that are setting up the plot. And so I had to step back and kind of look at my plot in a different way than I normally have been doing. So let me see if I can pull up that page. So I started looking at my plot sort of in a different way. I have the event that I call Enters New World, which is basically the initiating event where, you know, something happens to the character or the character does something that changes their situation in a very dramatic way. So that's kind of like the main first plot point that I have in my story. Then you have the climax, right? The climax is the big kind of boss battle or whatever that happens at the end of the story. Then you have the resolution. So I came up with what's the event that has my character entering a new world, what's the climax, and then what's the resolution. Then I stepped back before the climax and was like, what are two major things that have to happen before the climax? And I call those hills. Because, you know, if you look at the plot diagram, you have like the initiating event, which is where you start climbing up the hill, you have the rising action, you have the climax, and then you have the resolution. So it looks kind of like a mountain, right? So kind of on the way up during this rising action, I've implemented two plot points, one here, kind of, you know, a third of the way through, and I've called those hills. Where they're just like kind of like the major event that happens here, where there's sort of a pivot in the story's direction. You have another major event that happens here, which is another pivot that puts you closer to the climax of the story, then you have the climax. So it's almost like having two really tiny climaxes before you have the big one. That was kind of really difficult to do in the beginning. I mentioned before that this book is told through two different characters' perspectives, and so I had to do this whole hill thing for both of my characters, and I had to figure out, okay, should their hill events happen at the same time, like in back-to-back chapters, or could they happen like kind of in random places relative to one another, if that makes sense? Like, should I line up their events, or should I just have their events happening separately? And, you know, I don't know, but it's been like a whole thing trying to figure that out. And so that was the main thing in helping me figure out, okay, how do I make my main character's plot take more precedence over all the other plots? And then I've kind of rearranged the other plots to try to figure out, okay, how can I make these better feed into the plot? And so I created this tab in my notebook, in my OneNote, called pensiveness, because pensive means like thought or thinking, and I needed the noun version of that word, so that's where pensiveness came from. But basically, it's the tab where I go to where anytime I need to think about something, like I do a lot of these notes called thinking through this event, like where basically I say, okay, I have an issue with this event, and I need to solve this issue. So I basically just write about it, like what's the issue with the event, what are some possible ways, like brainstorming some possible solutions for that, and then usually I come out of there with okay, now I know how to move forward from this. So that's helped a lot. And whatnot, trying to figure out, would my character actually react this way? How does this character's knowledge of something, you know, impact how they interact with this other character or something like that? So it's been quite a journey trying to figure this out the past couple of weeks. And at this point in the story, I have finished part 1, which was like 8 chapters, I think. And now I'm working up to the first hill. So yeah, it's fun. A lot of it is recycling, you know, a lot of chapters from the first draft, and I've changed a few details of the story, so I've had to like read through and be like, okay, this detail is now changed, so I have to, you know, just edit it, update it right there in the text, and then move on. But Yeah, I'm still on the first chapter of Hill one. I went to Barnes & Noble yesterday trying to get through the Hill one, and I'm still in the first chapter of part 2. So it's so funny. You think writing a scene is going to go one way, and then you get there and you realize all these issues with it, and it takes you longer to figure out than you would have expected. And I actually finished the chapter when I left Barnes & Noble, and then when I was driving home, I was like, nope, I have to redo it. Like, nope, that's not how it would happen. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at now. But yeah, hopefully this video makes sense. These videos are kind of just my way of stopping back to kind of reflect on, you know, where I am in my writing journey. What are some interesting things that, at least things that I think are interesting that have happened in writing recently. And that whole pivot from Stormcloud to Pitchfork all of a sudden was really dramatic, because I was, not traumatic, dramatic, because I wasn't expecting to work on Pitchfork at least for a few more months. Oh, I should mention that my goal by the end of the month of March is to finish the second draft of Pitchfork, you know, which I can do if I work on kind of like one segment of the book each week. And I'm on, if I finish up to Hill 1 by the end of this week, I'll be back on track, but we'll see. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and I will see you next time. Toodaloo. Whisper to me words in a voice so small, like the one that to Elijah called, quiet as a candle, bright as the